My son forged my name for a $117 million loan, so I let the judge speak for me in court. I have never known a silence as brutal as the one my family gave me. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please hit that like button and subscribe. It'll help me keep opening my heart like this. My name is Martha Jennings. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a small coastal town outside of San Francisco now. But this story begins in Chicago, in a house that once echoed with laughter, and now holds only the ghosts of what I thought was love. I was once the mother who did everything. I can still feel the texture of those Halloween costumes under my fingertips. The orange felt of Andrew's pumpkin suit when he was 7. The way the sequins on his superhero cape caught the porch light. I stayed up until 2 a.m., my back aching over the sewing machine, because I believed that love was measured in the hours you sacrificed, the sleep you lost, the pieces of yourself you gave away without asking for anything in return. I held ice cubes wrapped in dish towels against skinned knees, whispering, "It's okay, baby, Mama's here," while tiny fingers gripped my sleeve. I spent nights in the hospital when Andrew had pneumonia at age 12, sleeping in that awful green vinyl chair that left permanent creases in my back. I whispered prayers beside his bed, bargaining with God. Take my health, take my years. Just let him breathe easier. My husband Daniel was my anchor for 41 years. He passed suddenly 7 years ago, a stroke that took him while he was tending to our tomato garden. I found him there, his weathered hands still holding a perfectly ripe tomato, a gentle smile on his face. His last words to me that morning were, "Martha, the tomatoes are coming in beautifully this year, just like you always said they would." After Daniel died, the house got quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of contentment, but the hollow quiet of abandonment. The kind of silence that makes your footsteps sound like thunder and your breathing feel too loud. Every room held memories that no one else seemed to want to preserve. I had one child, my son, Andrew. I loved him with every fiber of my being, with the desperate intensity that only mothers understand. When he married Jessica 8 years ago, I welcomed her with arms wide open. I gave them my time, my hands, my money, my weekends, my holidays. I babysat their children, Oliver, now 14, and Emma, now 10, whenever they needed me, which was often. I said yes every single time they asked for something. When they needed a down payment for their house, I gave them $12,000 from the savings Daniel and I had carefully built over decades. When Jessica's car broke down, I co-signed for a new one. When Andrew's construction business needed startup money, I handed over another $8,000 without question, because I believed, with the naive faith of someone who'd never been betrayed by the people she'd die for, that if I kept giving, they would keep loving. That generosity would somehow translate into the kind of deep, abiding affection I craved from the family I'd created with my own body and soul. But what I didn't understand then, what took me 68 years to learn, is that love built on convenience isn't love at all. It's usage dressed up as affection. It's exploitation wearing the mask of family obligation. For years, they came for Sunday dinner. Every week, like clockwork. But I began to notice it wasn't joy that brought them to my table. It was routine, habit, the unspoken understanding that free food and free babysitting were available every Sunday at 2 p.m. sharp. Andrew would arrive with the tired expression of someone fulfilling an obligation. Jessica would immediately start scrolling through her phone, making it clear that being present was different from being engaged. My grandson Oliver, now a teenager, would slouch in his chair, earbuds in, barely acknowledging my attempts at conversation. My granddaughter Emma, once so eager to help me bake cookies, had grown distant, more interested in her tablet than in the stories I tried to tell. And Andrew, my Andrew, the baby I'd rocked to sleep for countless nights, the little boy who used to climb into my lap and say, "Mama, you're the best mama in the whole world." He stopped seeing me the moment I stopped being useful. I should have recognized the signs earlier. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room, the rolled eyes when I offered suggestions, the increasingly rare phone calls that only came when they needed something, the birthdays that passed without acknowledgement, the Christmas mornings when I sat alone, waiting for a call that never came. But I made excuses. They're busy. They have their own lives. This is normal. This is what happens when children grow up and start their own families. I was wrong. The breaking point came with the Disney trip. Emma had been so excited about that Disney trip. "Grandma, we're going to Disneyland," she had chirped the week before, her 10-year-old face glowing with anticipation. For the first time in months, she seemed genuinely happy to talk to me, bouncing on her toes as she described all the rides she wanted to experience. I was thrilled. Not just because Emma was excited, but because I thought, maybe, finally, they would invite me along. Maybe after all these years of feeling like an outsider looking in on my own family, they would make space for me, just once. That afternoon, I drove to Macy's and bought a new cardigan. Lavender. The same color Daniel used to say brought out my eyes, made them look like the violets that bloomed in our first apartment's window box. I held it up to the mirror and imagined myself at Disneyland, maybe holding Emma's hand while we waited in line for the teacup ride, or sharing a churro with Oliver, trying to bridge the growing gap between us. I spent 3 days preparing what I thought might be our last family dinner before the big trip. I made Andrew's favorite pot roast, the one that takes 6 hours to cook properly, with carrots and potatoes that melt in your mouth. I baked Jessica's preferred lemon cake from scratch, the recipe my mother had given me, the one that requires separating 6 eggs and folding the whites by hand. I polished the dining room table until it gleamed and set out the good china, the wedding set that Daniel and I had received 47 years ago. I waited for the right moment to ask about joining them. I practiced the words in my head. "I know it might be last minute, but I'd love to come along if there's room." Simple. Not demanding, just hopeful. But I never got the chance to ask. Andrew cleared his throat after dinner, the way he used to when he was about to ask for something as a child. Jessica sat beside him, her expression carefully neutral, her hands folded in her lap like she was at a business meeting rather than her mother-in-law's dinner table. "Mom, about the Disney trip," Andrew began, not meeting my eyes. "We've already booked everything, and there just isn't room in the van." The words hit me like ice water. Not, "We wish you could come, but," not, "Maybe next time." Just a flat statement of exclusion, delivered with the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. Jessica added with that cold, rehearsed tone of hers, "Besides, with your arthritis, you'd probably struggle to keep up with the kids." Arthritis. I stared at her. The mild knee pain I had mentioned once, months earlier, during a phone conversation when I was explaining why I'd been moving a little slower while babysitting, that single passing comment had now become their excuse to leave me behind like luggage too heavy to carry. I had run 3 miles that very morning. I had spent the entire day on my feet, cooking for them, serving them, cleaning up after them. But somehow, mentioning that my knees occasionally ached after climbing stairs had transformed me, in their minds, into an invalid who couldn't handle a family vacation. I nodded. I smiled. I said, "I understand." But I didn't understand. I couldn't understand how the woman who had given birth to Andrew, who had raised him, who had sacrificed her own dreams and desires for decades to ensure his happiness, could be so easily dismissed, so casually excluded. They left that evening with hugs that felt mechanical, with promises to bring me back something special that we all knew were empty. After their car pulled out of my driveway, I walked back into my house and noticed something on the living room floor, a piece of paper that must have fallen from Jessica's purse. It was the confirmation for the Disney trip, a 15-seat van rental. I counted the names on the list. 14 people. Andrew, Jessica, Oliver, Emma, Jessica's parents, her sister and brother-in-law and their 3 children, 2 of Andrew's college friends and their wives. And in the 15th spot, Jessica's cousin Rebecca, a girl they barely spoke to, someone they complained about constantly, calling her irresponsible and drama-filled. They had chosen her over me. I sat on my living room floor, still wearing that lavender cardigan I'd bought with such hope, holding that paper in my trembling hands. The math was simple and devastating. There had been room. There had always been room. They just didn't want me there. That night, something inside me broke. Not with rage. I was too tired for anger. Not even with tears. I'd cried myself empty over smaller betrayals. Just a quiet cracking, like ice forming on a pond. A surrender so complete it felt like dying while still breathing. But I couldn't have known that what came next would make the Disney trip look like a gentle disappointment. Looking back now, I can see the pattern so clearly. The pattern I was blind to when I was living it, when I was too close to see the forest for the trees. It started small, years earlier. Andrew would call, not to ask how I was doing, but to ask if I could watch the kids, just for a few hours, that inevitably turned into entire weekends. Jessica would drop off laundry because our machine is broken, and somehow never get around to fixing it for months. They would show up for dinner empty-handed, never bringing wine or dessert or even a card, treating my home like a free restaurant rather than a gift freely given. I told myself this was normal. This was family. This was love. When Andrew's business started struggling 3 years ago, I didn't hesitate to help. He came to me with spreadsheets and explanations I didn't fully understand, talking about cash flow problems and temporary setbacks. He needed $15,000 to keep things afloat until a big contract came through. I liquidated one of Daniel's retirement accounts. The penalty fees alone cost me $3,000, but I didn't tell Andrew that. I handed him the check and said, "Pay me back when you can." He never did, and I never asked. When Jessica's mother got sick 2 years ago, they needed someone to watch the children while they drove to Milwaukee every weekend. I rearranged my entire life around their schedule. I canceled my book club, my church volunteer work, my few social activities. I became a full-time grandmother to children who seemed increasingly resentful of my presence. Oliver started treating me like hired help, demanding specific meals, leaving messes for me to clean, never saying please or thank you. Emma, once so sweet and affectionate, began rolling her eyes when I tried to engage her in conversation, clearly parroting attitudes she was learning at home. But I told myself, this was temporary. This was what families did for each other. This was love. Was I used? The question started as a whisper in the back of my mind, growing louder with each unreturned phone call, each forgotten birthday, each time I was needed but never wanted. The microaggressions were constant, like paper cuts that individually seemed insignificant but collectively bled me dry. Jessica had a particular talent for them, little comments delivered with a smile that made questioning them seem petty. "Oh, Martha, you're wearing that sweater again? I remember when you wore it to Emma's birthday party last year," said with concern, as if my repeating clothes was a sign of mental decline rather than simply having a limited wardrobe. "Maybe you should write things down more often, Martha. You seem to be forgetting conversations we've had. When I couldn't remember agreeing to babysit on a day they'd never actually asked me. We'd invite you to dinner at the new restaurant, but you probably wouldn't like the food. It's very trendy." As if being 68 automatically meant I had no taste buds or curiosity about new experiences, Andrew had his own ways of diminishing me. He would explain simple things as if I'd lost my capacity for understanding. "Mom, when you use the ATM, make sure you hit yes when it asks if you want a receipt. That's the piece of paper that shows your transaction." I had been using ATMs since before he was born, but somehow my age had made me incompetent in his eyes. My birthdays became exercises in loneliness. The first birthday after Daniel died, I waited all day for a phone call that never came. I finally called Andrew myself at 9 p.m. "Oh, Mom, happy birthday. Sorry, it's been such a crazy day. Jessica reminded me this morning, but then work got insane and..." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Jessica hadn't reminded him. They had both simply forgotten that I existed unless they needed something. The second birthday, I bought myself a small cake and put a single candle on it. I sat alone at my kitchen table, made a wish that my family would remember I was alive, and blew it out. The wish didn't come true that year either. By the third birthday, I stopped expecting anything. I spent the day volunteering at the animal shelter, holding abandoned dogs and cats, finding comfort in creatures who appreciated kindness without expecting anything in return. When I got the flu last winter, a particularly brutal strain that left me bedridden for 8 days, I called Andrew to let him know I wouldn't be able to watch the kids that weekend as planned. "Seriously, Mom? We've had this dinner planned for weeks. Can't you just take some medicine or something?" as if influenza was something I'd chosen for the inconvenience it would cause him. I ended up hiring a babysitter for them, paying $40 from my grocery money so they wouldn't have to cancel their plans. They never asked how I was feeling. They never brought soup or medicine. They never called to check if I was recovering. I spent those 8 days alone, feverish and aching, realizing that if something serious happened to me, it might be days or weeks before anyone noticed I was gone. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered 3 weeks after the Disney trip. I was dusting the bookshelf in my living room, the one where I kept Andrew's childhood photos and school awards, when I noticed a stack of papers on the side table. Andrew had been over the previous week for one of his increasingly rare visits, and he must have left them behind in his rush to leave, because spending time with me always seemed to be something he needed to escape from. One paper caught my eye. Loan agreement, $117 million, printed in bold letters across the top. My hands began to shake before I even understood why. I sat down heavily in Daniel's old recliner and read the document carefully, twice, then a third time. My name was listed as a guarantor, Martha Jennings. My house, the house Daniel and I had built together, the one we'd saved for 20 years to afford, the one where we'd raised Andrew and created 40 years of memories, was listed as collateral. My signature was at the bottom of the page. Except it wasn't my signature. I've signed my name thousands of times over 68 years. I know the way I form my letters, the slight tremor I've developed in my hand over the past few years, the way I dot my I's and cross my T's. This signature looked like mine, but it wasn't mine. It was too smooth, too confident, too young. Andrew had forged my name. He had used my house, my life, my security, my only inheritance from Daniel, to secure over $1 million for his construction business. And he hadn't told me, hadn't asked, hadn't even mentioned that he was in financial trouble serious enough to require such a massive loan. I sat in that chair for 3 hours, holding those papers, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My son, the baby I had nursed through pneumonia, the child whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the teenager whose college tuition I had helped pay by working double shifts at the department store, had committed fraud against me. He had looked at me and seen not his mother, but an asset to be exploited, not a person with feelings and rights, but a signature to be forged and a house to be risked without consent. The implications crashed over me like waves. If his business failed, and given that he needed over $1 million, it was clearly in serious trouble, the bank would come for my house. I would lose everything Daniel and I had worked for, everything we'd built together, everything I had left of the life we'd shared. I would be homeless at 68, with no savings left to start over, because I'd already given most of my money to the son who was now betting my future on his failing business without my knowledge or permission. I called Andrew immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. "Mom, what's up? I'm in a meeting." "Andrew, I found the loan papers you left here, the ones with my name on them." Silence. Long, telling silence. "Oh, that. Yeah, Mom. We can talk about that later. Like I said, I'm in a meeting. I didn't sign these papers, Andrew." "What?" "Of course you did. We talked about it, remember? You said you wanted to help with the business. I never signed these papers. This isn't my signature." Another silence. Then, in a tone I'd never heard from him before, cold, calculating, almost threatening, "Mom, you're getting older. Sometimes people forget things they've done. Maybe you should see a doctor about your memory." He hung up on me. I sat there staring at the phone, feeling something crack open in my chest. Not my heart. That implied something clean and sharp. This was messier, rawer, like old wood splintering under too much weight. My son had not only stolen from me, he was now trying to gaslight me into questioning my own sanity. He was using my age as a weapon against me, trying to make me doubt my own memory, my own perceptions, my very grip on reality. That night, I made myself a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Andrew with his homework, where we'd celebrated his high school graduation, where I'd held Emma as a baby while she napped in my arms, and faced the truth I'd been avoiding for years. Was I used? The question was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. Yes, I had been used. Systematically, deliberately, completely used by the people I loved most in the world, and now they were willing to destroy me to cover their tracks. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Robert Chen had handled Daniel's will and our estate planning, and he was the only attorney I'd ever worked with. When I explained the situation, his usually calm voice became sharp with concern. "Mrs. Jennings, this is fraud. Identity theft. If your son forged your signature on a loan document using your property as collateral without your knowledge or consent, that's a serious crime. Do you want to press charges?" I didn't answer right away. What mother presses charges against her only son? What kind of woman destroys her own family to protect herself? But then I thought about Daniel, about all the years we'd worked to build something stable and secure. I thought about the nights he'd stayed late at the factory, the way his hands had become permanently stained with machine oil, the small sacrifices he'd made every day to ensure we could afford our house. I thought about my own sacrifices, the dreams I'd set aside, the career I'd abandoned to raise Andrew, the decades of unpaid labor I'd performed out of love. "Yes," I said finally. "I want to press charges." But before I could take any legal action, I needed to confront my family directly. I called Andrew and told him I wanted to meet with him and Jessica that evening. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking as I dialed. They arrived at 7 p.m., and I could see the tension in their faces immediately. Jessica's jaw was set in that defensive way she got when she thought she was being criticized. Andrew looked like a stranger, his eyes cold, calculating. Nothing like the warm boy who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. "We need to talk about the loan papers," I said, gesturing for them to sit at the kitchen table. "Mom, we already explained this," Andrew said, not sitting down. "You agreed to help. You signed the papers. If you're having memory issues—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Stop lying to me. Stop treating me like I'm senile. I know what I signed and what I didn't sign. I know what conversations I've had and what conversations I haven't had." Jessica finally spoke up. "Martha, we're just worried about you. Living alone in this big house, forgetting things. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living." The audacity of it took my breath away. They had committed fraud against me, and now they were suggesting I needed to be institutionalized for objecting to it. "I'm not forgetting anything," I said, my voice getting stronger. "I remember every conversation we've ever had about money. I remember giving you $15,000 for the business 3 years ago. I remember the $12,000 for your house down payment. I remember never being paid back a single dollar. And I remember never, ever agreeing to guarantee $1 million loan." Andrew's face was turning red. "That's different. That was family helping family. This is business. You said you wanted to be more involved. When? When did I say that? What date? What time? What were we doing when I supposedly said that?" Silence. "You can't answer because it never happened," I continued. "You forged my signature because you knew I would never agree to risk my house for your business. You knew I would ask questions you didn't want to answer." That's when Andrew exploded. "You know what, Mom? You're right. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd be difficult about it. I knew you'd make it all about you, like you always do. This is my future we're talking about. My family's future." "What about my future?" I asked quietly. "You're 68 years old. What future do you need? You've got Social Security? You've got this house? The house you just put at risk without my permission. It's not like you're going to live forever." The words exploded out of him, and the silence that followed was deafening. Jessica reached for his arm. "Andrew, don't." "No, Jessica. She needs to hear this. She needs to understand that this isn't just about her anymore. I have a business to run, kids to put through college, a mortgage to pay. All she does is sit in this house feeling sorry for herself because Dad died." Each word was like a physical blow. I stared at my son, this man who had come from my body, who I had loved unconditionally for 42 years, and realized I didn't know him at all. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, get out of my house, now." They left, but not before Jessica turned back to say, "We're just trying to help you, Martha. When you're ready to be reasonable, we'll be here." Reasonable. As if objecting to fraud was unreasonable. As if protecting my home and my future was an act of selfishness. The next few days were a blur of phone calls. Andrew called repeatedly, sometimes apologetic, sometimes angry, sometimes manipulative. "Mom, I'm sorry I lost my temper, but you have to understand the position I'm in. If this business fails, we'll lose everything. The kids will have to change schools. Jessica's already talking about moving in with her parents." Then, when apologies didn't work, "Fine. If you want to destroy your own family over money, that's your choice. But don't come crying to us when you're sitting alone in this house with no one who cares about you." And finally, when nothing else worked, "I'm worried about you, Mom. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe we should have you evaluated. For your own good." The psychological manipulation was masterful. He was trying to make me doubt my own sanity, my own perceptions, my own right to protect myself. He was using my love for him as a weapon against me, threatening to withdraw what little affection he still showed if I didn't comply with his demands. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the lawyer's validation that I wasn't crazy or unreasonable. Maybe it was the clarity that came with finally seeing the truth about my family relationships. Maybe it was just that I'd reached the bottom of despair and had nowhere to go but up. Jessica tried a different approach. She brought the children over, something she rarely did anymore, and had them ask me directly about helping Daddy's business. "Grandma, why don't you want to help Daddy?" Emma asked, her 10-year-old eyes confused and hurt. It was emotional manipulation at its finest. They were using my love for my grandchildren to pressure me into risking my home and my future. "Emma, honey, I love you and your daddy very much. But grown-ups sometimes have disagreements about money, and this is one of those times. Are you mad at us?" Oliver asked, actually looking up from his phone for once. "No, sweetheart. I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you. But I was mad. I was furious. Not at the children, but at their parents for putting them in the middle of this situation, for using them as pawns in their manipulation game." After they left, Jessica lingered. "Martha, I hope you know what you're doing. Andrew is under so much stress right now. If this business fails because you won't help, I don't know what it will do to him. Or to our marriage." The threat was clear. If I didn't comply, I would be responsible for destroying not just Andrew's business, but his marriage and his family's stability. I looked at Jessica, this woman I had welcomed into my family, who I had supported through difficult times, who I had loved as a daughter, and realized she saw me as nothing more than a bank account with emotions that inconveniently got in the way of withdrawals. "Jessica," I said calmly, "I've spent 7 years since Daniel died trying to buy your love, and Andrew's love with money and favors and constant availability. I've given you everything I had to give, and it was never enough. It never made you love me more. It just made you expect more." Her face flushed. "That's not true. We care about you. If you cared about me, you wouldn't have asked me to risk my home without telling me. If you cared about me, you wouldn't be threatening to keep my grandchildren away from me unless I comply with your demands. No one's threatening anything. Yes, you are. You're all threatening me. You're threatening to call me crazy, to have me committed, to cut me off from my grandchildren, to destroy what's left of our family if I don't give you what you want." The truth hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my old friend Grace, someone I'd met in a grief support group after Daniel died. We'd lost touch when my family obligations became overwhelming, but I needed to hear a voice that wasn't trying to manipulate or threaten me. "Martha, I've been wondering about you. How are you doing?" For the first time in years, someone asked how I was doing and actually waited for an answer. I told her everything. The whole story poured out of me. The years of financial support, the forgotten birthdays, the Disney trip, the forged signature, the threats and manipulation. When I finished, Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Martha, honey, that's not love. That's abuse. Financial abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse. You don't owe them your house. You don't owe them your future. You don't owe them your sanity." Hearing it from someone outside the situation, someone who had no stake in the outcome, was like waking up from a nightmare. "What do I do?" I asked. "You protect yourself," Grace said simply. "You stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm." The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Grace's words echoed in my mind. You stopped setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. For the first time since Daniel died, I wasn't going to ask permission to protect myself. I made coffee, real coffee, not the instant stuff I'd been buying to save money for Andrew's endless needs, and sat at my kitchen table with the forged loan documents spread in front of me. The morning light streaming through the window made everything seem clearer, starker, more real. I picked up the phone and called Robert Chen, my lawyer, with hands that were steady for the first time in weeks. Mr. Chen, I want to move forward with pressing charges against my son for fraud. And I want to sell my house immediately, before the bank can seize it. The words tasted strange in my mouth, like speaking a foreign language I was just learning. But they also felt powerful in a way that nothing had felt powerful for years. Mrs. Jennings, are you certain about this? Once we file the police report, there's no undoing it. Your relationship with your son will be permanently changed. I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where Andrew had sat as a child, where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped with homework, where I'd received that devastating phone call about the Disney trip, and realized that my relationship with my son had already been permanently changed. It had been changed the moment he decided I was more valuable as a forged signature than as a human being. I'm sure, I said, and my voice didn't waver. That afternoon, I walked into the Chicago Police Department on North Michigan Avenue. The building was intimidating, all concrete and fluorescent lights, filled with the busy chaos of a city that never slept. But I wasn't intimidated anymore. I had been through worse than bureaucracy and paperwork. Detective Sarah Rodriguez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying temples. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes with the professional attention of someone who'd heard too many similar tales, but still cared about each one. Mrs. Jennings, I want you to know that elder abuse is more common than most people realize. Financial exploitation by family members is actually one of the most frequently reported forms. You're not alone in this, and you're absolutely not crazy for protecting yourself. Elder abuse. The term hit me like cold water. I had been systematically abused by my own son, my own daughter-in-law, by the people I'd trusted with my heart and my future. The hardest part for many victims, Detective Rodriguez continued, is accepting that someone they love could deliberately harm them. But love doesn't excuse fraud. Family relationships don't make theft legal. I filed the report that day. I gave my statement, provided the forged documents, and walked out of that police station feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Like someone was finally listening to me, finally taking my side, finally treating me like a person whose rights mattered. The next decision was even harder. I had to sell my house, the house where Daniel and I had built our life together, before the bank could foreclose on it. I contacted Maria Santos, a real estate agent who specialized in helping seniors navigate property sales. When I explained my situation over the phone, she didn't gasp or express shock or ask invasive questions. She simply said, "Let's get you out of this situation as quickly and profitably as possible." Maria was a woman in her 50s with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who understood that sometimes life required rapid, decisive action. She walked through my house that same afternoon, taking notes and measurements with professional precision. "The market is strong right now," she explained, standing in my living room where Andrew had played with Legos 30 years earlier. "Properties in Lincoln Park are moving fast. Given the urgency of your situation, I recommend pricing it competitively to ensure a quick sale. You should have offers within a week." I had lived in that house for 37 years. Daniel and I had painted every room at least 3 times, choosing colors that reflected our changing tastes and the different seasons of our marriage. We'd planted the oak tree in the front yard the year Andrew turned 5, and now it towered over the house, its branches reaching toward the second-floor windows we'd gazed out of during countless quiet evenings. Every corner held memories. The kitchen where Daniel had made pancakes every Sunday morning, always in the shape of animals to make Andrew laugh. The living room where we'd watched our son take his first steps, arms outstretched toward the coffee table Daniel had built by hand. The master bedroom where Daniel had died peacefully in his sleep, his hand still reaching across the mattress toward my pillow. But memories couldn't pay mortgage payments. Love couldn't protect me from foreclosure. Nostalgia wouldn't provide shelter if the bank seized my home because of my son's fraud. I signed the listing agreement with a steady hand. Maria was right. We had 3 offers within 5 days, and I accepted one that would close in 2 weeks. For the first time since discovering those loan documents, I felt like I was acting instead of reacting. I was making choices instead of having choices made for me. I was protecting myself instead of waiting for someone else to rescue me. The hardest part was deciding what to take with me. 37 years of accumulated life doesn't fit easily into a smaller space. And every item I touched carried emotional weight that made decisions feel impossible. I kept Daniel's wedding ring, which I'd been wearing on a chain around my neck since his death. I kept our photo albums, the tangible record of a marriage that had been real and loving and worth preserving. I kept the quilt my mother had made for our first apartment, its patches telling the story of our early years when we had nothing but love and hope. I kept Andrew's baby pictures, the ones from before he learned to see me as an ATM rather than his mother. Maybe someday he would remember who he used to be, who we used to be together. Maybe not. But those pictures reminded me that I had been a good mother, that I had loved him completely, that his choices now didn't erase the years when my love had been enough. Everything else, the furniture Daniel had built, the dishes we'd eaten from for decades, the clothes that still smelled faintly of his cologne, I donated to charity. Let other families create new memories with the objects that had witnessed our happiness. The day I handed over the keys to the new owners, a young couple expecting their first child, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The house had become a monument to my loneliness, a place where I'd waited endlessly for phone calls that never came and visits that felt more like obligations than gifts. I was free from the weight of maintaining a house meant for a family I no longer had, free from the memories that had become more painful than comforting, free from the symbol of everything I'd lost. That night, I checked into a hotel in downtown Chicago, the Palmer House, the same hotel where Daniel and I had spent our wedding night 47 years earlier. I ordered room service for the first time in my life, not because I couldn't cook for myself, but because I wanted to, because I could, because no one was expecting me to serve them instead. I sat by the window on the 15th floor, looking out at the city lights, and realized something profound. I had spent the last 7 years of my life waiting to die, waiting for my family to remember I existed, waiting for my purpose to return, waiting for meaning to find me again. But tonight, for the first time since Daniel died, I wasn't waiting for anything. I was living, actively, deliberately, consciously living my own life for my own reasons. Tomorrow, I would look for a new place to call home. Tomorrow, I would start the next chapter of my story. Tonight, I was simply grateful to still be here to write it. The storm broke 3 days after I closed on the house. Andrew had been calling repeatedly since the for sale sign appeared in my front yard, his messages growing increasingly frantic as he realized what was happening. I let them go to voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. "Mom, what are you doing? People are saying you're selling the house. Call me back immediately." "This is insane, Mom. You can't just sell Dad's house without talking to the family. Call me." "Fine. If you want to play games, we'll play games. But you're making a huge mistake." The final message was different. Cold. Calculated. "Mom, I spoke to a lawyer. If you're having mental health issues, we can get you the help you need, whether you want it or not." The threats were escalating, just as Detective Rodriguez had warned me they would. "When abusers lose control," she'd explained, "they often become more aggressive. They'll try anything to regain power over their victim." I wasn't a victim anymore. I was someone who had made choices, taken action, and refused to be destroyed by people who were supposed to love me. But I knew a confrontation was inevitable. I decided to control the terms. I called Andrew and told him to meet me at Millennium Park the next morning. Neutral ground, public space, witnesses if things went badly. "Bring Jessica," I said. "We're going to settle this once and for all." They were already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the bean sculpture, their faces grim with the expression of people preparing for battle. Jessica clutched her purse like a shield, her jaw set in that defensive way that had become her default expression around me. Andrew looked haggard, older than his 42 years, the stress of his failing business written in the lines around his eyes. I sat on the bench facing them, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to smooth things over, to make them comfortable, to sacrifice my own peace for theirs. The house is sold, I said without preamble. The police have the fraud report. My lawyer is handling everything from here. Andrew's face flushed red. Mom, you're destroying our family over money, over a simple misunderstanding. Stop calling it a misunderstanding. My voice was calm, steady, final. You forged my signature. You used my property as collateral without my knowledge or consent. You committed fraud against your own mother. Those are facts, not misunderstandings. Jessica leaned forward, her expression a calculated mix of concern and condescension. Martha, we're worried about you. Living alone, making these drastic decisions without consulting anyone. Maybe it's time to consider that you need help. I am getting help, I replied. I have a lawyer, a therapist, and a financial advisor. I have more professional support now than I've had in years. That's not what we mean, Andrew said, his voice taking on that manipulative tone I'd come to recognize. We mean medical help, mental health help. These aren't the actions of someone who's thinking clearly. There it was. The final card they thought they could play. If they couldn't guilt me into compliance, if they couldn't manipulate me into submission, they would try to have me declared mentally incompetent. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I had a complete psychological evaluation done yesterday, I said, handing Andrew a copy of the report. Dr. Patricia Williams, one of Chicago's most respected geriatric psychiatrists. She found me to be of completely sound mind, with no signs of dementia, depression, or any condition that would impair my judgment. Andrew's hands shook as he read the report. I had anticipated this move, prepared for it, countered it before they could even make it. I also had my lawyer document every financial transaction between us over the past 5 years, I continued. Every loan, every gift, every time I paid for something you claimed you couldn't afford. The total comes to $47,000. Money you never paid back. Money you never intended to pay back. Jessica's face had gone pale. Martha, we always meant to. No, you didn't. You took my money, my time, my love, and my dignity, and you never intended to give anything back. You used me until I was no longer useful, and then you tried to destroy me to cover your tracks. The words hung in the air between us, truth laid bare without apology or qualification. Andrew stood up abruptly, pacing in front of the bench like a caged animal. You know what, Mom? Fine. You want to know the truth? The truth is that taking care of you has been a burden for years. Do you know how exhausting it is to deal with your neediness, your constant demands for attention, your guilt trips every time we can't drop everything to cater to your loneliness? Each word was designed to wound, to make me question my worth, to convince me that my need for basic human connection was somehow pathological. But I had spent months learning to recognize manipulation, and these words had no power over me anymore. Andrew, I said quietly, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without needing something? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Jessica reminding you? He stopped pacing. The questions hung in the air, unanswered, because they were unanswerable. I'm not needy for expecting my son to remember I exist, I continued. I'm not demanding for wanting occasional contact with my grandchildren. I'm not guilty of anything except loving you more than you ever deserved. Jessica finally exploded. You think you're so perfect, don't you? You think you're this martyr who sacrificed everything for her ungrateful family. But you know what? You chose this. You chose to give us money we didn't ask for. You chose to babysit when we needed help. You chose to make yourself indispensable so we'd have to keep you around. The accusation hit its mark because there was a grain of truth in it. I had tried to buy their love with money and services. I had made myself useful because I was afraid that without usefulness, I would have nothing to offer. But that didn't excuse fraud. That didn't justify theft. That didn't make their abuse acceptable. You're right, I said, surprising both of them. I did choose to give you money. I did choose to babysit. I did choose to try to buy your love because I was terrified of losing the only family I had left. I stood up, facing them both directly. But you chose to take advantage of that fear. You chose to exploit my love. You chose to forge my signature and risk my future. You chose to threaten me when I finally said no. Andrew's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he was scared. Mom, please. If the business fails, we'll lose everything. The kids will have to change schools. Jessica's talking about leaving me. I made some bad decisions, but I was trying to save my family. By destroying me? I asked. By risking my home, my security, my future? What kind of man saves his family by sacrificing his mother? The kind of man who's desperate, he said, tears finally starting to fall. The kind of man who sees everything he's worked for falling apart and makes stupid choices. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my son. Not enough to excuse what he'd done, but enough to understand the fear that had driven him to it. Andrew, I spent 42 years loving you unconditionally. I gave you everything I had to give, but I won't give you my house, my security, or my dignity. I won't destroy myself to save you from the consequences of your choices. I pulled a business card from my purse and handed it to him. This is my new lawyer's number. All communication goes through him from now on. If you want a relationship with me in the future, it starts with taking responsibility for what you've done. Full responsibility. No excuses, no justifications, no blaming anyone else. And if we don't? Jessica asked, her voice cold with threat. Then you don't, I said simply. I'll survive without you. I've been surviving without you for years already. I walked away from them then, leaving them sitting on that bench in Millennium Park, surrounded by the sounds of a city that didn't care about their drama or their pain or their desperate attempts to justify the unjustifiable. Behind me, I heard Andrew call out, "Mom, please, don't do this. Don't destroy our family." I didn't turn around. I had spent 7 years trying to hold together a family that existed only in my imagination. I had sacrificed my dignity, my resources, and my peace of mind for people who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. I was done destroying myself for people who had never valued what I was destroying myself to give them. I was finally, completely, irrevocably done. 6 weeks after that confrontation in Millennium Park, I did something I hadn't done in over 40 years. I bought a one-way ticket to somewhere I'd never been. The small coastal town of Mendocino, California, had appeared in a travel magazine I'd picked up at the hotel. Something about the rugged coastline and the Victorian houses perched on bluffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean called to me. It looked like a place where a woman could start over, where the sound of waves might wash away decades of accumulated pain. I had money now from the house sale, more than I'd ever had at one time in my life. After paying off the legal fees and settling my affairs in Chicago, I was left with enough to buy a small cottage and live comfortably for the rest of my life. Financial security I'd earned not through patience or sacrifice, but through the simple act of protecting myself. The cottage I found was nothing like the house Daniel and I had built. It was tiny, maybe 800 square feet, with weathered cedar shingles and windows that faced directly west toward the ocean. The realtor, a woman named Susan who'd moved to Mendocino after her own divorce, walked me through the 2 bedrooms and single bathroom with obvious affection for the property. The previous owner was an artist, Susan explained, showing me the sunroom that had been converted into a studio. She left all the easels and supplies, said she hoped someone would use them to create something beautiful. I stood in that sunroom, looking out at the Pacific stretching endlessly toward the horizon, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, possibility. Not the desperate hope I'd clung to in Chicago, waiting for my family to love me back, but genuine possibility for creating something new. I bought the cottage that afternoon. Moving across the country with only a few suitcases was surprisingly liberating. I had no furniture to arrange, no accumulated possessions to find places for, no ghosts of previous lives hiding in closets and dresser drawers. Just me, my clothes, my photo albums, and Daniel's wedding ring on its chain around my neck. I bought a bed, a small dining table, 2 chairs, and a comfortable reading chair by the window. Everything else I could acquire slowly, deliberately, choosing each item for how it made me feel, rather than for what it represented or what others might think of it. The first morning I woke up in my new home, I made coffee and carried it out to the small deck overlooking the ocean. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Constant but never monotonous, powerful but somehow peaceful. I sat there for 2 hours, just listening, just breathing, just being present in my own life for the first time in decades. I joined a painting class that met twice a week at the community center. I'd never painted before, never considered myself artistic, never believed I had anything worth expressing through art. But something about mixing colors on a palette, about watching blank canvas become something personal and meaningful, called to me. My first painting was terrible. A lopsided seascape that looked more like a child's crayon drawing than a work of art. But it was mine. I had created it with my own hands, my own vision, my own interpretation of the beauty I saw every day from my windows. Helen, the instructor, was a woman in her 70s who'd been painting for 50 years. She looked at my terrible seascape and said, "You have a good eye for color. The composition needs work, but that comes with practice. Keep painting." So I did. Every morning after coffee, I set up an easel on my deck and painted what I saw. The ocean in different moods, calm and silvery in the morning, wild and green during storms, golden and peaceful at sunset. The cypress trees twisted by decades of coastal winds, the Victorian houses of my neighbors, with their elaborate gingerbread trim and carefully tended gardens. I painted badly at first, but I painted honestly. Each canvas was an attempt to capture not just what I saw, but how it made me feel. The freedom of horizons that stretched beyond my ability to see their end. The peace of solitude that felt chosen rather than imposed. The quiet satisfaction of creating something that existed only because I had willed it into being. 3 months after moving to Mendocino, I received a letter from Chicago. Not from Andrew or Jessica, but from my neighbor Grace, the woman who'd helped me see the truth about my situation. "Martha," she wrote, "I hope you're finding peace wherever you are. I wanted you to know that Andrew came by last week, looking for you. He seemed different, smaller somehow, defeated. He asked if I knew where you'd gone, and I told him I didn't. He sat in your old driveway for almost an hour before driving away. I thought you should know." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. I felt no satisfaction in Andrew's apparent distress, no vindication in his defeat. I felt only a quiet sadness for the relationship we'd never been able to build, and a deeper relief that his problems were no longer mine to solve. That afternoon, I painted a self-portrait, something I'd been avoiding because it felt too intimate, too revealing. But sitting in front of my bathroom mirror with a small canvas and my steadily improving techniques, I tried to capture not just my physical appearance, but the person I was becoming. The woman in the painting had gray hair that caught the light instead of hiding from it. Her eyes were clear and direct, meeting the viewer's gaze without apology or supplication. Her smile was small but genuine, the expression of someone who was content with her own company. She wore a soft blue sweater that brought out the color of her eyes, a sweater she'd bought because she liked it, not because someone else might approve. Looking at that painting when it was finished, I realized I was looking at someone I'd never met before. Not the desperate, people-pleasing woman who'd spent decades trying to buy love with sacrifice. Not the lonely widow who'd waited by the phone for calls that never came. This was someone new. Someone who'd been buried under years of other people's expectations and had finally clawed her way to the surface. I started taking long walks on the beach, something that would have been impossible in Chicago, but was a daily gift in Mendocino. The beach was often empty, especially in the early morning, and I would walk for miles with only the seagulls for company. The physical activity strengthened my body, but the solitude strengthened something deeper. Walking alone by the ocean, I learned to enjoy my own thoughts, my own observations, my own pace. I wasn't hurrying to meet someone else's needs or adjusting my stride to match someone else's expectations. I was simply moving through the world at my own speed, in my own direction, for my own reasons. I began talking to other women in town, not from loneliness, but from genuine interest in their stories. Susan, the realtor who'd become something of a friend, had moved to Mendocino after her husband left her for a younger woman. She'd used her divorce settlement to start her own business, and had found a happiness she'd never experienced in 30 years of marriage. Margaret, who owned the local bookstore, had retired from teaching and moved to the coast to pursue her love of literature. She hosted a book club that met monthly, and the discussions were unlike anything I'd experienced in Chicago. These women talked about books not as escapes from their lives, but as reflections of the richness and complexity they'd found in themselves. Dr. Patricia Reeves, my new physician, was a woman in her 60s who'd left a prestigious practice in San Francisco to provide health care in a small community. During my first appointment, she asked not just about my physical health, but about my emotional well-being, my sleep patterns, my stress levels, my satisfaction with my new life. "You seem remarkably healthy for someone who's been through significant trauma," she observed, reviewing my test results. "Your blood pressure is excellent. Your weight is stable. Your cholesterol levels have improved. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." What I was doing was living for myself for the first time in my adult life. No one was depending on me for emotional support, financial assistance, or constant availability. No one was monitoring my choices, criticizing my decisions, or expecting me to justify my existence through service to their needs. I was simply being Martha Jennings, age 68, a woman who painted mediocre seascapes and excellent sunsets, who walked on the beach every morning and read books every evening, who made friends slowly and carefully, and kept her own counsel on matters that mattered. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gradual, like the way the ocean slowly reshapes the coastline, wearing away what doesn't belong and revealing what was always there underneath. 6 months after leaving Chicago, I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in years. A woman who was genuinely happy with her own life. 1 year later, I hosted my first art exhibition. The Mendocino Art Center had a small gallery where local artists could display their work, and Helen, my painting instructor, had been encouraging me for months to submit some pieces. I'd always declined, certain that my amateur efforts weren't worthy of public display. But something changed when I completed my 50th painting. It was a seascape, like many of the others. But this one captured something I'd never managed before. The exact moment when the sun breaks through storm clouds and turns the water from gray to gold. Looking at it, I saw not just technical improvement, but a reflection of my own journey from darkness to light. "You need to share these," Helen said when she saw it. "People need to see what healing looks like." So I did. I selected 25 paintings that told the story of my transformation. From the dark, turbulent scenes I'd painted in my early months to the bright, hopeful landscapes that now filled my studio. I titled the exhibition Second Dawn, because sometimes life gives you a chance to watch the sun rise again. The opening night was small but meaningful. Neighbors came, friends from my painting class, women from the book club, Dr. Reeves, Susan the realtor. People stood in front of my paintings and saw something that moved them. Something that spoke to their own experiences of loss and recovery. An elderly man named Frank, who'd lost his wife the year before, stood for 20 minutes in front of my painting of a lone cypress tree weathering a storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "This is exactly how I feel. Like I'm still standing, but barely. That tree survived because it learned to bend," I told him gently. "Sometimes that's the only way to weather the storm." Margaret from the bookstore bought 3 of my pieces, saying she wanted to support local artists who paint truth. A young couple from San Francisco, visiting for the weekend, purchased my painting of the cottage where I now lived, saying it reminded them of new beginnings they were hoping to make in their own lives. But what no one expected was who walked through the gallery door just as the evening was ending. Emma, my granddaughter. She was taller than I remembered, her dark hair longer, her face more mature. She was 11 now, old enough to have convinced her mother to drive her from San Francisco, old enough to have insisted on seeing her grandmother, despite the family drama she didn't fully understand. She walked slowly through the gallery, studying each painting with the serious attention of someone much older than her years. When she reached me, she was holding a folded piece of paper in her hands, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Grandma," she whispered, and her voice carried the uncertainty of someone who wasn't sure if she was still welcome. I knelt down to her level, this child who'd been absent from my life for over a year, and felt my heart break open with a love I'd thought I'd lost forever. "Emma, sweetheart, how did you find me?" She unfolded the paper in her hands. It was a drawing, crude but heartfelt, the kind of art that only children create with pure honesty. It showed a gray-haired woman standing by the ocean, arms outstretched toward the waves, a genuine smile on her face. Below it, in careful cursive letters, she'd written, "I miss you, Grandma. I'm sorry they hurt you. I love you." I broke down completely. I fell to my knees and held her like she was oxygen itself, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her small body against mine. Around us, the gallery patrons quietly applauded, some wiping away tears, understanding that they were witnessing something profound and healing. People in the gallery began to cry. The journalist who'd been taking photos for the local paper snapped a picture of our reunion, and that image would later appear in newspapers across the country, with the caption, "Love Finds a Way, a grandmother's journey from betrayal to redemption." "How long can you stay?" I asked through my tears. "Just tonight," she said. "But Mom said if you want to see me again, maybe I can come back. She said she understands now why you had to leave." We spent that evening on my deck, wrapped in blankets, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of pink and gold. Emma told me about school, about her friends, about the art classes she'd started taking because she wanted to be like her grandmother, who paints feelings. "Are you happy here, Grandma?" she asked as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "I am happy," I told her honestly. It took me a long time to learn that I deserved to be happy, but I finally did. Sometimes we have to save ourselves before we can love others the right way. "I'm proud of you," she said, those words from an 11-year-old carrying more weight than any adult approval I'd ever received, for being brave enough to choose yourself. The next morning, as Emma prepared to leave, she hugged me fiercely and whispered, "I'm going to learn to paint too, so I can understand how you feel when you make something beautiful." After she left, I sat in my studio and began a new painting. This one was different from all the others. Not a seascape or a landscape, but a portrait of two figures on a beach, a woman and a child. Their faces turned toward a horizon that stretched beyond the canvas edge, full of possibility and hope. 6 months later, that painting was featured in a magazine article about my journey. The story, titled "The Art of Starting Over," reached women across the country who were trapped in similar situations, being used, manipulated, and emotionally abused by family members who claimed to love them. Letters poured in from women who recognized their own stories and mine. A 74-year-old from Texas wrote, "Your story gave me permission to stop being my son's ATM. I thought I was being a good mother, but I was just enabling his irresponsibility." Another woman from Ohio shared, "I've been supporting my daughter's family for 15 years while she treats me like hired help. Your courage helped me find my own. I'm setting boundaries for the first time in my life." I answered every letter, sharing what I'd learned about the difference between love and manipulation, about the courage required to disappoint people who'd taken your sacrifice for granted, about the peace that comes from finally putting your own oxygen mask on first. Now, as I sit in my studio 3 years after leaving Chicago, I can see how every painful moment of my journey was necessary. The abandonment taught me self-reliance. The betrayal taught me discernment. The loneliness taught me to value my own company. The financial abuse taught me to protect my resources. The emotional manipulation taught me to trust my own perceptions. I paint every morning now, not because I've become a master artist, but because creation is the opposite of destruction. Every brushstroke is an act of faith in my own worth. Every canvas a declaration that I deserve to exist, not just as a resource for others, but as a complete person with my own dreams, my own vision, my own right to happiness. My cottage by the ocean is filled with light and laughter and the sound of waves that never stop singing songs of freedom. My bank account is secure, my health is excellent, my days are my own to shape exactly as I choose. I have friends who value me for who I am, rather than what I can provide, and I've learned to be the kind of friend who gives generously, but never gives everything. I sleep deeply every night, peacefully and without worry, with the sound of the ocean as my lullaby. I wake each morning grateful for another day to walk on the beach, to mix colors on my palette, to choose how I want to spend the precious hours I've been given. The most powerful lesson I can share is this. Love that requires you to diminish yourself isn't love at all. It's exploitation wearing a mask of affection. Real love wants you to thrive, to grow, to protect yourself, to be whole and happy and secure. You are never too old to stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You are never too old to choose yourself. You are never too old to discover that you're worth more than the sum of your sacrifices. Have you ever lived through something like this? Do you know someone who's being used by family members who claim to love them but only show up when they need something? Tell me in the comments below. Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else find the courage to save themselves. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. These messages need to reach the people who need to hear them most, the mothers, fathers, grandparents, and family members who are slowly dying inside while everyone around them takes and takes and takes. Someone out there needs to know that it's never too late to choose themselves. Help me get this message to them.